President Trump is getting ready to announce new tariffs today.
Tariffs.
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 Tariffs. Tariffs.
Tariffs.
Tariffs.
This has become unavoidable. So let's talk about it. If you ask 100 people what they think a tariff is, you'll likely get a myriad of answers that all vaguely have an idea of what it is, but most likely none of them will feel all that set in stone. It's like drinking a LaCroix. Yeah, this almost sort of, in a way, tastes like there's a tariff in the next state over, but that's usually as good as it gets. Why is that? Do most people really not know what it is? Surely we all learned about it in school, or at the very least have Googled it recently so we don't sound stupid in conversation. Can we just agree on the definition and call it a day? Not really. The reason being that world trade is complicated. Not just because it's a huge topic, but because it ultimately comes down to the behaviors of people, and people are not always predictable. So let's start from the beginning. Tariffs have been around since ancient Greece, and very simply put, it is a tax on imported goods paid by the importer to the federal government. In these early days, it is believed tariffs were used to generate revenue and protect state-run business. Now jump all the way to the early days of the United States in the late 1700s, and the same idea is still in place, but it's not without its controversy. The two opposing forces in this controversy were that of free trade and that of protectionism. Protectionism in the US was mostly fathered by Alexander Hamilton, who was the United States' first Treasury Secretary in the years following the American Revolution. The argument for protectionism in the 18th century was that for the United States to industrialize, or for any developing nation to do so, the so-called infant industries needed the government to help them by giving them enough time to scale and stabilize. This means they needed protection from competition, typically foreign competition. Since the infant industry's resources are slim, Hamilton argued the government should temporarily enact tariffs, quotas, or similar trade policies to prevent overseas competitors from sweeping in and undermining the budding industry with unbeatable prices due to their greater experience and deeper pockets. These measures allow for infant industries to mature and become competitive themselves, at which point they should no longer need such aid from the government, a condition which economist John Stuart Mill later added must be met to justify these initial protective measures. On the other end of the argument was free trade, which means not doing that. A free trade policy really just means the absence of these protective measures by the government, while a free trade agreement is an official agreement between two nations to eliminate or at least highly restrict barriers to imports and exports between them. So the question is, did Hamilton's plan for protectionism work? In short, yeah, it sure did. It allowed for the US economy to find its own footing, and in the 19th century, it's estimated that tariffs accounted for as much as 95% of the federal government's revenue. But then came the turn of the century.
What year is it? Oh, right around the turn of the century.
Thanks, John. With the Industrial Revolution and the new income tax, protectionism from foreign industry was no longer necessary, and the federal government was well funded. Wait, there's gotta be a meme for this. Hang on. Oh, there it is. But following the Roaring Twenties came the proverbial economic hangover that was the Great Depression. In the early days of the Depression, Herbert Hoover signed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in June of 1930, hoping, as before, it would protect American industry and boost the economy. Instead, the opposite happened. The tariffs prompted retaliation from other countries, and ultimately trade between the US and Europe plummeted, which worsened the economic conditions caused by the stock market crash. Ever since, the US has widely favored free trade. This really kicked off with the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act of 1934, signed by FDR, which shifted the narrative of global trade towards decreasing barriers and pushing for freer and fairer trade. Now, just like in its early days, there is still a lot of speculation around the effects of tariffs, good and bad. Some argue that the barrier for trade will increase production on American soil and create jobs. Most economists, however, point to the long, turbulent history of tariffs and trade wars to say that it is ultimately a net negative. Prices go up significantly, and the jobs created in the meantime come at a higher price than is justifiable. What we know, though, is this. Tariffs in the US were originally intended to be a temporary measure, and they have always been riddled with controversy. What's to come of the latest move by the US government is an impossible outcome to predict, as these things are highly influenced by the state of our economy, our relationships with other nations, and the always unpredictable behavior of people. So, tariffs, good or bad? You tell me. Seriously, you always do. So pass this video along to someone else who's curious, and to keep up with history as it unfolds, you can at tag24.com.